Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rich, Simple Human. Today I'm sitting down with Imogen Koufou, and this is going to be a very enlightening conversation. Imogen is a psychotherapist in private practice lecturing in existential philosophy, and you're going to learn more about that, if you don't know what we're talking about, as we progress the conversation. Imogen, hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, Lindsey, it's so good to be here.
This is absolutely fantastic. And for those of you that aren't subscribed to the newsletter, please go to my website, lindseyfrancis.co.uk, subscribe, and you will also receive the newsletter after this episode, which will tell you more about what we've been talking about. Imogen, we're going to jump straight into my 5 quick fire round questions, but I think you and I know that this might not go exactly to the book because this is a really exciting conversation to explore and unpack for those that are in leadership positions, for those that are also wondering about their meaning in life, looking for more purposeful living, and essentially subscribe to what you and I talk about, being a human being and not being a human being. So if that applies to you, stay listening. If it doesn't apply to you, but you like the conversation, please share it with a friend who might benefit. And I hope everybody, male and female, is listening and thinking they are listening for some similarities here. Imogen, you have a great private practice. I also deal with clients in a setting where we are intimate in people's experiences. And today we're going to start by talking about being versus doing. Imogen, are you happy if I start with my first question?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Great. We often talk about being a human being rather than just a human doing. And I would love to know from you, A, what that means to you and what practices you use to help you or your clients slow down, pay attention, and really live with presence.
I love that question. Being rather than doing. It's all there for me. Everything's in there. What do we even mean when we're saying that? And that for me, being rather than doing is what called me to become an existential psychotherapist. And that question, it really is at the heart of what existential philosophy is all about. How do we live well? What is being? What is this very being that I am? And existential philosophy really challenges this, which is so dominant now in modern society in the way that we're living, this focus on fixing, doing, the outcome. And a lot of us are missing that kind of heartfelt way of living, feeling at home in ourselves, in our bodies, in our connections with other people, in the way that we're living, in the way that we're working. So existential philosophy, it actually tells us that existence is our mode of being. This idea, Jean-Paul Sartre coined the term existence precedes essence. So actually we first are before we start doing anything. And it's about returning to that. Sounds like the most simple, but also equally the most complicated thing, isn't it? I am my own very being. So actually this idea of this doing, are we running away from ourselves? Existential therapy it's an understanding focused approach. So it's about understanding and getting into the very nature of how I am. How am I being? Rather than explanation. And we do live in a world of explanation where we're kind of taught in schools, through our education systems, to know, to be sure of ourselves, to come off in a certain way. And that's how we will do well. That's how we will move forward in our lives. But this is an approach with questions of meaning, with exploration of meaning. And, really, when it comes to it on our deathbed, can we look back and feel that we've lived well? When we're in bed at night, does anybody wake up in the middle of the night and have that sudden experience of dread or anxiety? What am I doing? What's my legacy going to be? How am I turning up in my relationships that really matters behind closed door at home with my kids? I may be really polished in the office. I may be successful. I may not. And I may not be living up to my potential, and what does that really feel like? How is that? How am I being? So that really contrasts to this sort of explanatory approach, which, is very dominant. We are experiencing a lot of that in the world. And actually, it's really interesting that therapy in the last 5 to 10 years is actually seen a decrease in effectiveness in they're reporting how successful they feel therapy has been. We've got to kind of look at what that is. And actually, a lot of that is to do with a belief, because when we're kind of treating ourselves in this way of doing, looking for this fix, looking for a new technique, looking for a new supplement, looking for even a new podcast, dare I say it, but this is a good podcast. So it's about opening up and exploring in dialogue. That's what I love about what you're doing. But, when we're looking at it, how are we even approaching what we're listening today? Are we looking for a solution? Or are we sitting still and paying attention and noticing what's coming up for us as I'm listening to me and Lindsey speaking? Instead of zooming in on a question to answer, this is an understanding approach which is more concerned with opening up a kind of clearing of meaning. Because when we do that, when we're just sitting with our very being, that's the place from which we find new possibilities, new ways of understanding that really matters to us, that's significant to us, that we can kind of clarify, and we kind of have these aha moments in therapy that seem to really land us, shift us, and move us. And that, for me, is where long-term change and a more purposeful way of living comes from. And also, when we start to ask these questions about what is being, which is what existential philosophy is all about, we're starting to recognize that actually making a meaning out of something is in our very nature what we are. We come into the world and we pick up projects. We find searching for meaning. So then when we realize that we're this in our being searching for meaning, then we recognize that is kind of slippery. That will always evade us to a certain extent if we're trying to pin it down. If we're trying to pin it down in our way of doing, I am this CEO, I am a mother, I am these job roles, these titles, this, even if I'm dependent on being successful. What does success look like? And how many times do we reach that point and it's not enough? Why? That's what I'm really interested in. So this philosophy and this therapy is about bringing us back to ourselves in a new, or maybe a very old way. It may feel like a deeper way of being in connection with the world that's always been there, that we evade so much in our daily lives. And can we stand by ourselves as our very selves in that way? What would that look like? For me, I can come onto this. What we recognize is that we are related. We're always impacted by our surroundings, our community, by our world. Often we're losing sense of that. We look at climate crisis. We look at the crisis in our political world. Everybody's sort of taking such stark opinions, and that kind of sense of being, connectedness that we actually are, may be becoming very thin. Existential therapy reveals that there is diversity in the world, that we are all unique, and yet we are all connected.
This is so good. Imogen, I see people, especially because I work a lot in the high net worth space, I see them searching for meaning on the outside. So they're searching for meaning in material. They might be savvy and say, oh no, Lindsey, I'm searching for meaning in experiences. I'm taking my children places. I'm having experiences. I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Yet they're still in the doing and not in the being. Almost lacking a level of internal validation that makes them feel, I think, empty and hollow. I think you see the same in many, many people. Where do you start with people who come to you and you see that, but yet they can't perhaps articulate what's going on?
That's a really beautiful thing, is that, whatever I might see, or you and I might see, and we might see patterns in people, when someone comes into the room, their lived experience is their own lived experience. And actually it's very unusual for somebody to invite us to have a dialogue where however they actually are is okay. Like, that's not, I'm looking at you and I'm seeing, that sounds a bit like a daddy issue, or that sounds a bit like, I've heard that before, or, making the connections. Actually, what I'm going to do is practice what I'm preaching, and I'm going to do that being rather than that doing to the other person. It's so rare. Like, how many times do you actually, when you talk to your spouse or you talk to your business partner or whatever, do you really feel that your very being in itself is okay as it is, in its struggle, it's really a real treasure of an experience. So when I sit with somebody, that's the first thing that I do is I try to remove my assumptions. I try to remove my expectations. I try to bracket those things and kind of sit with them and be curious. It's such a beautiful, like childlike thing to allow ourselves to go back to being curious as to who this person is across the way from me. Not the titles, not what they're dressed, not what they're wearing, whatever it is. And let them be, just be in all of their struggle and all the chaos and all the mess, and try to hold that need to maybe want to fix it. Certainly to begin with, to know that I don't know this person and I want to get to know this person. So, because actually what I find and experience, what helps that person to change from that struggle of that lived experience, if I'm not finding, I'm doing all these things and it's not feeling enough, or it's not really deeply connecting with me, is that they need to be still with their struggle and to find a way out of that goes, oh my gosh, I can feel myself. That comes through dialogue. That comes through an encounter. And it lasts when it's that person's very own experience. And often actually just clarifying. It's like polishing a diamond. It's like, you tell me more, actually, yeah, more. How many people ask you loads and loads of questions, but not like a question with, in the back of my head, I'm thinking, yeah, but what about, and did, when you were a child, did none of that. It's just like, oh, tell me more. Where, and it's very embodied, trying to breathe and notice where in our bodies.
And I think clients love that experience when you're in that space of I like the polarity of the words curiosity and wonder, because they're different experiences in the space. But when we're being curious, tell me more, unpacking it, but like you say, gently and openly. And then when you're with a client in that wonder, that sort of, gosh, how interesting, how revealing. We're not looking for an answer, but we're just reflecting on what's come up with a state of wonder. And I think that's the moment, isn't it, when you suddenly have that unveiling, if you like.
That's the word.
Isn't it just a beautiful? I think that's probably what makes all of this work so worthwhile, when you get to be in that with somebody.
So it's so hard to pin down what we're saying, especially in a world where we want to make sense of this. And actually, this is also not easy. How many people do we see, and I've got to own up, we struggle with the doom scrolling and we sit down at the end of the day, are we really connecting with our partners, or are we watching Netflix? It's really hard it's very, very hard to do for ourselves. And the question is why? And the why to that, why is it so hard to sit still? Isn't necessarily coming up with like some Freudian explanation. This is not, for the sake of making a nice theory, because that doesn't necessarily change us. But we do need to be, it's hard, really, really honest. So we really need to be in a relationship with somebody that makes us feel incredibly safe. Something needs to be really ethical, really safe, really contained, really well boundaried enough for us to go, okay, you got this? Yeah, I've got this. Okay, let's go. Let's do it. Let's be, and that's what I love about therapy and about having these dialogues where it's like, there is no right or wrong here. Let's just explore. Let's just, if anything that's coming up, that's the things that you really don't share ever, we can go there in the service of even just that sense of, oh my gosh, getting it off my chest to start with. And then just,
I think it's that feeling safe, isn't it? Like you say, especially because I guide a lot of visualization and trying to use that creative brain. People will sometimes share that most unusual things that have come up. I was thinking about this. Let's wonder on why you might be thinking about that. Let's not just go in with logic, but let's go in with creativity and using that different neural circuitry to allow ourselves to see, feel, or reveal something new. Not this logic, give me, let me do. It's super exciting. Imogen, I love talking about this work. We're talking about searching for meaning, and I want to ask you about purpose over profit, because we see a lot of clients who are driven by the bottom line, being successful, making money, having stuff, doing things, feeling seen and heard because there is money coming in to their bank accounts. In a world totally obsessed with growth and returns, and unfortunately we see this as well in the coaching and the therapy space, how do you personally keep purpose at the heart of your own profitability as a business owner? And how do you work with other people on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, haven't we? About it's a funny business, therapy, because essentially I'm charging for being human, for being as human as I possibly can be with another human being. And it is a challenging thing, but at the same time, you know, it's about exchange and it's about living. And of course, we need profit. We need to live. And of course, money makes life, some things in life, a certain amount of money makes it easier. But it's also about seeing this drawing out to a larger scale of seeing this is the world going round and I'm part of something bigger. That is often that sense of realizing our relatedness and our connection in the world brings so much meaning and purpose to so many. It's very isolated and this kind of focus, this dominance on individual personal accumulation of wealth and profit is a black hole. It's a black pit. There is no end to that. And often what is driving that need for it to be me at the top and my voice heard, a lot of people I find, even the people with the loudest voices, in the dead of night, it's that little voice inside that still doesn't really believe that it's what I have to say is a value of worth, or could I have said it differently? Could I have said it better? Because actually what we're lacking of so often is a sense of depth of being as part of a whole. So it's about like everything in moderation, everything in proportion, and everything having a sense of purpose, which is greater, but also holding it loosely. When we become very rigid about accumulation of wealth, or very rigid about I need that house, I need that car, or I want to have that title, that's when I feel like we soon speed up and then we slip. Actually, that sense of connection to purpose feels ever more sort of far away.
That control.
Control, yeah.
It's the control. And when we do it, we start that gripping, even if it's in our meditation practice, that it blows it totally. I'm gripping, I'm grinding. I'm a big fan of data. I must make my HRV as high as possible today to show that I'm in, rest and digest and I'm not in fight or flight. I'm meditating and, I'm gripping. And the whole body knows you're doing it. You're doing driven. You can't do meditation. You have to be meditation. You can't do in therapy, you have to be in therapy.
But often we don't even realize that we are gripping until something breaks. It's often the case. I often see people once something's broken, a relationship, a body, parts, something happens that breaks, then a chasm kind of opens and something slips. Even, when we're ill and all of a sudden we don't realize how much we're taking it for granted, our bodies and our health, or the other person who suddenly leaves or dies. It's often at those moments of opening that people end up in therapy. But actually, then sometimes we can just kind of rebuild and start picking up steam again, because when we realize that actually our very being is related to the world, when we sit in that space which really challenges this dominant sort of individual personal wealth and growth, and that will bring you, TikTok definitely says that handbag is going to sort your life out, or whatever it is. This is against that. This is a sort of more primal, recognizing that each one of us is a kind of manifestation of our being, going back to that being, and also alongside one another. It's a deeply respectful recognition of being alongside other people in the world. But it's not all warm and cozy. This is why we evade it so much, because it brings with it a huge amount of uncertainty. When those chasms break open, we ask for help, but then we close them up again and we pretend, actually, we pretend on the everyday that we have this certainty that thing will sort that out, that will bring the fix, that money, that job, that car. Because actually the reality is that we live in a world of vast uncertainty. What will be in the world is uncontrollable. Our natures, each other, otherness, being with around and being interconnected with the realm of other people, is a vastly uncontrollable reality that I'm part of, I'm inextricably linked to, I'm affected by, and we're not fully in charge of it. We're just not fully in charge. So in the face of that relatedness and that uncertainty, that's where we get anxious. That's where we get stress, tension, and that's actually unavoidable. And we obviously live in a world where anxiety is like one of the dominant things people come to therapy with, looking to fix. But it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we're looking for a fix to anxiety that is a fix, that thing's going to let us down. You know, if we're always looking for something solid, we're always going to be let down. You know, and actually, the anxiety comes from this attempt to deny or reject a deeper existential anxiety. When there's chasms, when the everyday opens up and we sort of start to see that, oh my God, we're all set in time. We're all set by these limits of birth and death and our relatedness in this world. That's the truth. And that is not an easy truth to live with. That's the stuff that's underlying all this everyday, busy, noisy, doing, accumulation. And yeah, and this is a world of like sort of celebratory of that sort of separatist individualization. That's the world that we live in more so today. The speed of the modern world and the speed that technology is advancing, but it's advancing into the realm of humanity and human being, which is not appropriate. This is why it's a scary time, really. It's about how do we engage with technology for advancement and remain on with our humanity. And our humanity is most often revealed in dialogue, in encounter with one another.
What's the answer to that question, Imogen? How do we remain human in the face of this mechanization of the human experience?
For me, it occurs most often to start with in the realm of dialogue, like sitting with another human being. We reveal our humanity to each other so vividly when we really sit to encounter each other. And so I do think it starts with dialogue. I think it starts with, on our own, it's actually very easy to evade ourselves, isn't it?
Our self-talk is unbelievable.
Well, yeah. And we just sort of keep ourselves going and sitting with somebody else purposefully and saying, right, let's put aside our assumptions of each other. So this is not the bickering. This is not the, you know, putting outside of ourselves, who's going to win this argument, who's in control here. You know, those kinds of dialogues and breathing together and feeling that tension. That's where I think we start. That's where you can have these profoundly connected moments of, oh my God, just as I am, and someone's seeing me as that, that's allowing something to be different. It's allowing.
Thinking, we're just projecting ourselves there. And I'm thinking about the own, you know, even in this conversation, I'm listening and then I'm thinking, I must ask you a question. You know, you're in this space where like, oh, having a nice chat. Oh no, we're always bringing ourselves, aren't we, into that space and then trying to find that, where's that liminal space where we can really have, where something's actually happening.
It is so hard. Liminal spaces, isn't it? Liminal spaces is and that's what we've so desperately tried to avoid, the tension, the chaos, the liminal spaces.
For those people that now think, what on earth are these two talking about? Liminal spaces is a concept that's transformed probably my approach to living, because I now recognize if I can get into a liminal space, that's where everything actually happens. But it's a space where we have to be very allowing of the unknown and the uncertainty.
Yes.
Can you explain, because you are the academic and I'm not, what a liminal space is and how somebody might begin to go into one?
Well, the first thing getting into any liminal space is the word you just said, unknown. It's like not knowing. And I know, you know, when I talk to people who are especially in systems and I talk about this in education as well, because I think it's massively missing in our education system, right from when we start school, age 4 or 5, which is far too young anyway. We're learning to know, not learning to not know. We're learning to conform, not learning to question. We're learning to understand, not sit in a liminal space, which might be facilitating a conversation or a space where we sit with not knowing, you know. And obviously there's always that pressure to move on, to answer, jump in, answer the question. And what happens when there's nobody bringing about the answer or the conclusion? That's It's odd. It's really difficult to explain, isn't it? It's a really
It's
difficult.
impossible
It is.
to explain if you can't taste it. It's a bit like explaining to somebody, you know, often they say, imagine somebody who's blind and try and explain the colour red. It's a concept, isn't it?
It is, but also for me, strange places bring this up for me, like in the face of my child. You know, I was on a school trip with my youngest child a couple of weeks ago, and we were outdoor. I love these outdoor, you know, we go and learn about the Stone Age and stuff again. I enjoy all of this outdoor learning more than my kids do. They're just cold. But, you know, I see it on the faces of children as they're trying to navigate the world before they've kind of become fixed with the mass of what we wear in the world, one of the many masks that we operate with and live in the world. I see their little faces and they're not sure, and they've thought, I'm not going to ask that question. Or they've just had a feeling, there's just like a felt response to, it might be joy, it might be fear, often fear. We're so fearful as animals. I see it on their little face. And it was this little girl on this trip. I just knelt down, I just kind of looked at her, and I just sort of, without saying anything, just lifted my eyebrows like, you okay? And she met my eyes and she just burst into tears. And we sat together and I held her, she sat on my knee. And there was no explanation to this because she's, you know, I don't think it was a specific thing. It was an experience that she was having that I met with her, and she had an outlet, and it was beautiful. That was it. We moved on. I see it in my kids' faces all the time. It's just like not closing down or getting on, just being with them in those moments. And children, much more naturally, before they start to build all of this up in the world, seem to just be in that space more easily. We lose it. It's such a sad thing. We lose that curiosity. We lose that beauty of just the present moment, of looking at a leaf, you know. And that's why a lot of these mindfulness practices or being in nature and walking are so effective, because it brings us back to a simpler way of being, a more connected way of being with the world and with one another.
That's a huge sophrology practice, actually, Imogen, that you reflect on an object, for example. And I went for a walk this morning, and I call it peeling my eyeballs. I like go out and I really try and think, if I could peel like my eyeballs and really see something that I wouldn't normally notice, what would I notice? And this morning I saw something red on the floor, and I thought, what's that? And it was a rose hip. So I picked it up and I brought it home and I put it by the sink in the kitchen. And I was like, I wonder how it got that red. I wonder I'm not a scientist or a chemist. I have no idea why it's red. I have no idea why it's so shiny. I wonder what animal might eat this. Maybe it's poisonous. What would happen if I ate it?
Yeah.
And I was having this lovely dialogue with myself. And it was like 2 minutes. I was like, that was a great morning. The rest of the day goes completely wrong. It doesn't really matter. But just a simple practice where we're childlike in the way we meet the world and the way we meet each other.
And I think we do need a regular practice in some form of grounding in this way. But also when we operate from that space, where we can almost like, we know how it's really embodied as well. It's like you just use all your senses, what things smell like, what things taste like. How does my body really feel? Does the back of my throat feeling a bit scratchy today? Like what, you know, it's very much about our body. We can extend our way of being from there out into our everyday. And I'm not saying, you know, in existential philosophy, we talk a lot about inauthenticity and bad faith. This idea that we're operating in the world from a place of, it might be accumulation or a mask that we're wearing, or we're making assumptions about what we think we're supposed to be doing based on what we think other people think we're supposed to be doing. God, it gets complicated. That's bloody complicated, isn't it? That whole thing. But so I'm talking about, like, you can't operate in this mode. You can't meditate all day. Or you can. You want to be a monk, be a monk. If you don't want to be a monk, you're going to live in the world, right? So you are going to go out into your everyday, and you're going to do the shopping, and you're going to go to work, and you've got real pressures, and the world does operate in a way where we need money to pay our mortgage, to live, and all the rest of it. And it's not saying that we can live moment by moment in a state of present being all the time. I certainly protect my way of being for in the service of my clients when doing therapy. I don't operate like that all the time. But I feel like it's like a cultivation of a sense of knowingness of oneself. And from there, I can live with greater purpose. Like it's like taking up my own project in my life, knowing that it is only moment by moment, that it is coming to an end, that I will age. Life has these unknowns. I may get hit by a bus tomorrow. Anything could happen, and that's awful and true. That's the reality. And of course, we don't go around thinking I'm going to get hit by a bus all the time. We just turn that off and we just get on. But it's knowing that that is not the truth, that that veil of the everyday is a veil, and we do need to lift it regularly. And then I do feel like it shifts our way of being. I can feel it in my stomach as I'm even saying it, like my back against my chair, and I can feel it drop right into my belly, you know. And it's like when I pick up my kids, if I'm like, from there, I can see them, you know, I can be ready for whoever's had an argument with who and whatever's gone on and who's anxious about what, you know. And I can feel more like myself in how I respond to the world. And then I kind of feel more at home in myself. I feel more connected to others, feel less isolated. You know, it's a beautiful, and it's not, that's unique to me, but you can also do this working as a CEO in a high-flying job. You can also do this in a voluntary role at age 16. You know, it doesn't matter. It's free. It's there.
The power of consciousness, totally free. Go outside and find something you've never noticed before. You know, it is simple, but it's not easy.
It's not.
I love what you just said about the children, Imogen, because I had an experience recently. I'm a huge data tracker, you know, Whoop enabled consciousness, whatever want to call it. And I was super tired, super busy, and I'd been traveling a lot, and I went to see my children, and it was so wonderful to see them. And it was reflected in the data that my whole being just went,
yeah.
And when I look, and I, you know, then I actually saw the evidence on the graphs. I was like, my HRV, in you know, against all odds, super tired, massive load of traveling, huge amounts of work, some confrontation, which is terrible for our nervous system. But just seeing my two children and physically, you know, touching them, holding them, hugging them, drop in.
It's like having an inner compass, isn't it? That you can connect back into, regardless of what else is going on. You know, we're much less swayed when we're aware.
Yeah, for the people around us. I mean, you talked about community earlier. We can find this more in dialogue when we can be with people in a present way. And like, I love being with people, not all the time, but like conversations like this. It's just really appreciating the fact that we've got language and technology, and that we met when we haven't talked about how we met, but in our random way at an art class in the most odd, you know, as you do, and then just got chatting, and here we are now, several months later, following the breadcrumb trail.
Yes.
You know, the plans that the universal or your higher power already has for you, following that along with curiosity and not control. I'm not ringing you saying, right, are we doing business? What are we doing? We're like, yeah, should we just let's see where it goes.
And it's, you know, you still have boundaries and all these other words that we have, and they are important. They are. And you can engage in the way that you use technology as a means to opening our experience, validating whatever word you want to use, is great. It's amazing. It's an incredible thing. And it's about the bigger picture, in service of what? You know, zooming out and being able to land and put things in perspective. That is gold. It's gold dust, isn't it?
But that's the essence of being human.
Yeah.
In itself. I am going to ask you another question, because it is a podcast and I'm meant to be asking you questions, but I kind of wish I wasn't. So let's see if we ever get to all of them. I want to ask you about legacy and vision, because we are all dying. It's a fact. It's also a fact that we came into the world with our first inhale, and we go out of the world on our final exhale. And I say this all the time when I'm guiding. So I want to ask you, Imogen, if your future family were gathered in a warm and purposeful space years and years from now, what story or value would you most want them to carry forwards?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I feel like actually underlying a lot of what people come to therapy for is a sense of this. It comes out in this question, because it's a recognition of our end, isn't it? It's a recognition of the anxiety that brings us up. It shows that we are purpose-driven, meaning-making beings when we're concerned with, what am I leaving? I also find a lot of people come to therapy with this issue of, you know, things aren't going well, or things are running out of control, relationships aren't working. I'm concerned with fixing something so that it will be okay in the end. It will be okay in the end. And of course we don't know. You know, one thing that when I think about this question, I imagine there was certainly a time in my life where I'd like to think I'm going to do things well in my life, and I want for the end of my life for my children to be there, they'll want to be there. We live in a world where, gosh, there was a thing on the other day that I was reading about. A third of Americans live in this complete disconnection, cut off from family members, which is massive. Like, the real, like a pandemic of this situation. People are living more isolated or making choices around, what went on and what they felt was traumatic and that they want to disown or move away from, and how they want to live, choosing how they want to live in a new way. I want, I'd love for my children to be there and want to be with me, and that I've done a good enough job as a mother. This are the people that I think of. Do I want to have written a book? Do I want to, all these things, they don't necessarily feel like they will matter as much. I guess for me now, I'd like to think that when my kids, when they get older, would say, I would be able to keep having conversations with them. So they can say to me, Mummy, you did this one day and that wasn't okay. I want to be able to come to the end of my life, or move through my life, never mind the end of my life, with a sense of acceptance of what is, and to remain open and curious. And at the end, if that is, Imogen was always curious would be enough, because I think that's what makes me feel alive. I want to be curious to my children, not to know that I think that I know who they are, and tell them who they are and tell them what life was, because they are their own person, will always become somebody different and have a right to their own history and memory, which makes us everybody who we are. It's that curiosity that I want to be my legacy, not for a purpose of fixing something down, because I know in a sense of myself that then I'm living. When I'm curious, I feel like I'm at home, I'm living well, So that I feel that sense of openness. I have such a, I'm so blessed in my job that I meet new people regularly, and I get this opportunity to meet them not knowing who they are. And I actually said to my supervisor a couple of weeks ago, I said, I feel like the key to my practice is maintaining that sense of first session meeting in every single session that I have, and with every person that I have. I think that would be that's it. It allows for everything, doesn't it? It allows for every
But
possible.
it's such a tension, isn't it, Imogen? Because you can't just rock up like not knowing what's happening. You're the professional and you're holding the space. And I'm laughing because I've got a session this afternoon where I've got the 5 senses practice to do with a client on paper. Is that actually what's going to happen? I have no idea. It could happen, but I'm projecting my sense of what I think is right and trying to allow the fact that I have no idea how this person is going to show up.
Yes.
I have no idea what's really not required, because that sounds like you've done no prep at all. But this is a very odd way to try and live as a...
It is. I think for me, the way I make sense of that is it's like this combination of curiosity and belief. Because I actually am also, I may well in my sessions provide a certain amount of structure. And of course there are boundaries, and there's payment, and there's all the rest of it. And there's the hour, and that time slot is set. So you do have to provide these semi-real structures, and then you kind of let somebody loosen it from there to let go to the unknown. But also that what's really crucial is this sense that I'm talking about. For me, it's like that sense of meanness, or that groundedness, or that being comfortable with the unknown, comfortable in the chaos, sort of, or at least some sense of acceptance of the not knowing. And that provides a sense of, let's say, belief, and it's actually like a sensory experience. So when I'm sitting with somebody and I'm kind of channeling into that, my body, I trust. So actually, like, I use that and my sense, and it's not a kind of like, I know, it's like I'm here. So how I'm experiencing this person opposite from me is true. There is truth in that. And therefore, I kind of value that. If I'm kind of really validating, valuing myself, I know that what I'm experiencing is truth. That sense of belief in being provides a grounding from which what I'm really doing and how I'm turning up is really valuable. I think it's that kind of belief, and also not knowing, that curiosity and not knowing come hand in hand.
asked me about imposter syndrome the other day, and early on in my podcast, I actually did cover imposter syndrome, and it came up a lot, and it hasn't come up for a long time for some reason. And somebody said to me about imposter syndrome, and I said, well, I don't have imposter syndrome. I'm just showing up where I was called to go.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? I was like, I hadn't really realised what an odd thing that was to say, but you've just said a similar thing.
Yes.
Show
And don't
up.
you're just there. But don't you also think that imposter syndrome is a modern epidemic? Why is it a modern epidemic? I see this with my kids, and this is a criticism I have of education systems, modern education systems, because they're not fit for purpose anymore. We teach people imposter syndrome. This might sound a little there, but we are teaching people to mask up. I'm also coming at this from the realm of neurodiversity, and you can put that language to it. But we're all, my way of looking at neurodiversity is about all brains and all people. And we're all on a spectrum, and we're all wearing masks or masking. Why? So some of it is protection, some of it is needed, some of it is getting on. But when we're assuming those roles, this is where bad faith comes into. This is where imposter syndrome comes in. That's what we're teaching kids to do. Like navigate this social world, navigate this information, figure out what you've got to do to succeed and get on. And it's quite insidious. It's quite subtle. And people are having to navigate the world in silence and make it up as they go along. And then I think you start to disconnect from your bodily experiential sense of yourself. You don't know who the hell you are then. By the time you're a teenager, yes, we all want to fit in and try things on and make mistakes. And that is so important. That is part of life and development. And we want our kids, I think, more so to get outside and get off their devices now and go and make mistakes and explore and meet. But you've got to have somewhere where you can go and have that dialogue, somewhere that feels that you can land to open things up, to go, who am I in this? Because this doesn't feel right. I see it already with my 8-year-old little girl, and she's like navigating things at school, and kids make bad choices. She's like, oh, well, they said this and I kind of went along with it. Okay, yeah, and how did that feel? Not right. Good. What does not right feel like? Let's talk about that.
I often use the word deep cries out to deep, because that's what I want. I desire the deep in me to call out to the deep in you and have these sorts of conversations. But I find that we're so busy going long almost.
Yeah.
We're going long and fast. So we're never going deep. And I've got a real yearning, and I'm really hoping people are listening to this thinking, yeah, I feel the same. When you've got that yearning, what do you do with it, Imogen? I think this is the calling to come into these sorts of spaces and have these.
I think this is why we met. I think this is how we met. Our freak meeting at an art up in the hills in Morzine.
Yeah.
I think that is that connection. And I remember coming back from meeting you and being like, I've just met someone. When you meet someone, do you know what I mean? But you can have it literally. You're coming out of your house and somebody lets you go that you weren't expecting to wave you out, and you meet their eye. It can be that quick, and it makes your day. Like that moment of, it's just someone, I connected. And I think that is like, we've got to start investing in that and taking time for that.
But you have to peel your eyeballs to do it.
I love that. Peel your eye.
This is like lifting the veil. It's the same sort of feeling. I was at the airport a few months ago. I happened to start talking to a lady. She's like the most amazing person I've ever met. I spent the day with her last week. It's changed my life in so many ways. If I had had my head in my phone,
yes,
she would never have caught my eye. We would never have started talking. My husband was standing there. I was with my kid, who's like, oh my God, here we go again. She's off chattering. Because when we do that, we had this conversation. I was like, this is epic. And obviously we swapped numbers, and then we met, and my friends always laugh at me. They're like, why are you meeting all these random people, Lindsey? Like, what's going on? I just meet people and we see what happens.
Yeah.
I want to live like that. You want to live like that. But do your friends say, Imogen, who are you talking to now, and roll their eyes and start thinking?
Yeah, I do get that. I do. I mean, one of my closest friends said to me not that long ago, she's like, literally, everyone just opens up to you. It's weird. Like, people stop and say the most personal rant. You meet somebody and they've just told you something ridiculously personal. And I'm like, yeah, but I think also that's about paying attention and offering someone safety in like, yeah, I don't know, and I'm here. I don't know, and I'm here. And that, it reverberates, doesn't it? But it's a beautiful way to be. It's a beautiful way to be.
I don't know, but I'm here. And actually, if we could teach our children to stand in that,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm here. Leaders, can you imagine if a leader said in a corporation, especially with AI, I don't know, but I am here. And you could feel that their heart rate variability was high enough. We've got 8 meters of resonance on us. Horses have way more. That's a whole other podcast in itself. And everyone could feel that that was a genuine thing. I don't know, but I'm here. Everyone would be like, okay, great, let's go.
Yeah.
It would alleviate most people's anxiety.
Yes. We
In a
do
heartbeat.
not need to know to provide safety and security. We actually need to not know, and we need to really turn up.
Well, that's my prayer for everybody listening today, that we just show up in our fullness, in the not knowing, and get comfortable with that, rather than this, I know, even when we don't. That, God, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. I do want to ask you another question, if you don't mind. As I'm the host, I get to, I suppose, do what I like, really. That's the power dynamic. In the same way as if you're a leader, there is a power. This is not equality. You are paid these people, therefore you tell them what to do and they do it. Remember that. That's a huge privilege to hold. And it's a bit like the privilege of parenting. I am now going off on a tangent. When we realize the privilege we have as parents to disciple, to discipline, to guide, to role model, and we really take that seriously, Imogen, in my life, it changed everything. And I just really want to encourage other people that if you are parenting thinking, this is really hard, when we change our perception and perspective into this is a real privilege and this is the job, in the same way we take up the mantle of leadership, it's so important to be human in this.
I also think that with power is an interesting one, is because actually a lot of us just find ourselves in positions of power that we weren't even sure that we were. How did we get there? I run a group for parents who are parenting neurodiverse children. And when we meet, it's just like the most amazing space where we can all just share how it actually is. And it's a bit like, I wonder whether our children in 20 years' time watching the videos of these meetings, they would laugh. Because none of us really know what we're doing. These positions of power are created. They are. We create them as a society. And actually, when we just recognize the privilege and the potential for power can be so dangerous. When we recognize actually that we just have responsibility rather than power, I prefer thinking of responsibility. Like, what responsibilities do I hold in my life? The danger for corruption of power is in all of them, or I recognize in that responsibility through recognition of it. That's where personal ethics can come from. How do I want to be in this? How am I being in this relationship? And also, if we have responsibility, then we also have responsibility to look at however we're turning up, that's our responsibility. So what do we need? What do I need in any situation? When I look at what responsibility I have, or look at what power I have, what do I need so that I do not run away with that power and start telling people how it is, how it should be? And then you lose that reality of connectedness, and you start doing everything from your own perspective. God, it's a slippery slope from there.
Isn't it? And responsibility, I can feel it in myself. My throat's going a bit tight because I'm thinking, oh, responsibility, what if I get it wrong? And I can feel that fear response just as we're using the word. And you're right, that privilege, that responsibility, that power, this is the emotional granularity. How do I feel about these things? What does it bring up in my body? What does it turn on and turn off? And can I feel that? That's exciting work that you do.
And that's what therapy is all about, I think. It's like unpacking what is your responsibility, but also what is not. What are you assuming control of? What are you assuming that you know? What bits are you assuming about what other people think, feel, want? What are you, what's really going on here? Because, yeah.
Right. Spiritual compass question is the last one, if you don't.
Yeah,
these are one of my favourites. We've talked about compass already today, and we talked about external validation, internal validation, and this sort of navigation that we're turning off in the body so often. Can I ask you, Imogen, where are you right now in your spiritual life, and how does that guide your work, decisions, relationships, and vision for the future and other people?
I think spirituality and that word is really, it can be really difficult because I feel like it's almost become overused in this world. I think in the modern world. And I think it's also can be so dangerous because it can be such a trigger word for people. It can bring up the voodoo schmoodoo. I don't want to go there. That all sounds, for me, spirituality is the ultimate. I think more of this word as like the ultimate expression of my own being, that uniqueness that is me. And so that expression of that can be in any form. For me, it's so personal. It is connected very much to that way of groundedness of my being and connectedness of my not knowingness. Like when I'm in the middle of that and I'm like at home in not knowing, and it makes me feel a bit sick, but I'm also like, no, it's like I'm there. That I have a practice that helps me to cultivate that, makes space for connecting and sort of like powering into that, so that I kind of build up my tank so that when I go out into the world, that again, like against that imposter syndrome, I'm actually feeling that the words that come out of my mouth are more considered in a way that's considered and is me. There's a meanness about it. So my spiritual life is central to my lived experience today. And I would say that actually when I was younger, I was one of these little people that was always had huge questions in my head about religion, about what's beyond space, like obsessed with the fact that I wanted to know, I wanted to have answers to questions that no one could give me. Physics couldn't give me, religion couldn't give me. And in my life, I've tried so many things because I'm curious, I'm interested, I want to. But a lot of the time I was looking for, even therapy, it was about looking for some concrete answer. And it wasn't until I recognized that my spiritual connection is right in the middle of the not knowing that is where I've landed. Everything else that I've been looking for an answer around my spiritual compass has always led me to a sense of disconnection and then a sort of feeling quite numb, actually. You know, why is it that I've gone all the way down that route with that particular religion, or all the way down that route with that particular framework of language, thinking, philosophy, and I've felt less myself, you know. And again, this comes back to education. We learn to adopt models of things, structures of ideas, rather than landing at home in the sense of ourselves. Now, I'm not an idea. I am a concrete embodied being alongside others in the world. And when an existential philosophy for me was the space where the language didn't make sense, opened the cast, I landed and I went, oh, there's something in this that's not giving me answers. And there's something about that not giving me the answers that feels right. That feels like there's space for me-ness in here, but not in a dominating way and not in a passive way. Something in the middle, which just me there. So that is central. And that's central to my try to practice getting in the middle of the bed for me in that way, which that for everybody's different, you know, what that practice looks like.
I love the way you've described that. And I've got such a clear image of that central space inside ourselves where it's me, and that secret place where you also may meet with your own essence, spirit, higher power, whatever it is. That space when you know that you've gone there and you can get there is that's not where everything is on the outside. It's where everything is on the inside.
Yeah. And both, though, because we're this, like, you know, porous being, aren't we?
Of course.
We're this constantly and always have been, always will be affected by everything and everyone in the world around us. And yet we can also only know the world from us in this way.
One day at a time. For anybody now thinking, I must do, or speak to Imogen or speak to Lindsey, and I really want to know it. One day at a time. Just if you can find yourself in a place of wonder, just for a moment, then know that you're already on the way to getting there. Imogen, we could have like 27 podcasts on this. Before we close for today, is there anything we didn't cover or anything you'd like to share before I ask you to share your links to what you do?
No, I think I just want to close by saying, you know, if anything that anyone can take from this, it's an invitation to ask a question of who am I? ask yourself that question.
Who am I?
Yeah.
Simplest question in the world. The whole reason I do what I do is I had a book when I was about 6, and the cover was Who Am I and Who Are You? And that was central to how I've ended up here. Who am I and who are you? And that noticing of difference was so important to me that it's led me all the way down this path nearly 50 years later. And here we are together in this space. Imogen, it's been a blessing today to connect with you again. I hope there's many, many more moments like this.
Absolutely.
I think there will be people out there wanting to talk to you now. What's the best place, or how can they find you quickest?
My website, ik-therapy.co.uk.
Amazing.
I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, but yeah, find me through the website. I'm here.
All the links will be below. You can always find me, obviously, on Rich Simple Human, lindseyfrancis.co.uk. You'll find the newsletter for this episode winging its way to your inbox when we go live. So please sign up on the website. Please share. This is not a profit-making podcast. This is a podcast for us just to try and bring these sorts of conversations into your world, into your space. And if you have learned anything today, just try and find that liminal space. Go and have a look in your mind, in yourself. I also want to remind people that this is not about self-development, because you're already exactly as you're meant to be, but it's about self-awareness and deepening that sense of self. So, Imogen, you've played a massive part today. Until next time, thank you so much.